Hello, welcome to the Praying Christian Women podcast. I am Alana here with Jamie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited that we get to continue on our series about She Prays Like a Girl, our new book that will be out for pre-order by the time this episode comes up or pretty shortly thereafter. And we're just basically taking some of the topics that we wrote about in the book. And instead of Jamie writing a chapter and then me writing a chapter and then Jamie writing a chapter, now we get to have actual conversations about it, which I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, me too.
So, do you want to tell people kind of the basic topic? I know we started a little bit last episode, but do you want to explain a little bit about the book for people who weren't in for that one?
Yes. So it's She Prays Like a Girl. I'm gonna
Oh,
read
I've
that
got
out
the
to you.
subtitle here.
You have the
Discover the
subtitle and
joy.
then
Yep. Discover the joy and power of praying like you and no one else.
yes. And so the idea behind the book is that when little girls don't have baggage. I mean, that's kind of the bottom line. Like, and when you talk about doing something like a girl, like punch like a girl or run like a girl, little girls are gonna just do it with everything they've got. And we'll talk a little bit about this later, just kind of how the title came to be. But the idea is the baggage that we can carry, the comparison, the idea that we're less for being women, all of those things,
Mhm.
negative connotations that come with being women, whatever. Those are all things that actually can hinder our relationship with God. And so the goal for this book is to bring freedom to every woman that reads it, that they would be able to get rid of that baggage, recognize it, get rid of it, and just have the freedom to connect with God in an authentic way, totally unburdened from any baggage that might come with that, and just to embrace our womanhood and the
Mhm.
things that make us uniquely women, and beyond that, the things that make us unique individuals, and just go with that. Pray by embracing those things and
Yeah.
not trying to be like someone else.
Yeah. Amen. And I mean, even the things that make you weird, right? Like,
Hmm.
I think a cool thought exercise for everybody listening is think of something that you're maybe a little bit self-conscious of,
Hmm.
or something if you've kind of outgrown being self-conscious about stuff. First, tell us your secret. Second, think about the things that just like make you very unique and strange. So here's one. I'm going to give you an example, Jamie. We talked in the last episode. I don't really love sci-fi. And to be fair, I know I'm going to ruffle a few feathers. Sci-fi is not the go-to fiction genre though for many Christian women, right?
No.
It's
In
not. So
fact, it feels a little bit, sometimes I'm reluctant as a
yeah,
Christian woman to say that I like sci-fi because it makes
yeah.
people think, oh, you believe in all kinds of weird stuff
Right,
then?
right.
Or, yeah.
So let's take that. Let's take sci-fi as something that makes you a teeny tiny bit weird, at least in our
Sure.
little subculture of Christian
Hmm.
women. How can you take that and turn it into something that actually makes your prayers even more impactful? Like, how does the fact that you have a brain that's wired in such a way that you enjoy reading sci-fi, how can that be a praying superpower for you?
I feel like in some ways, I mean, science, whether it's science fact or science fiction, it makes me feel closer to God.
Hmm.
I have something in me that just wants to be in awe of something
Yeah.
crazy and
Hmm.
possible. Like,
Uh-huh.
I love entertaining, like, when I get to the point where my prayer feels stale, I start meditating on God's greatness. And I will sometimes even watch YouTube things on quantum physics or like different ideas on what time could actually be or how that impacts us
Uh-huh.
on a secular level, even, or on a
Yeah.
Christian level, but to apply to my knowledge of who God is, to remind myself how big He is. And so it launches me into greater praise. And I know that
Yeah.
some people, those ideas feel scary, and it kind of
Hmm.
makes them feel like they might want to shy away from that,
Yeah.
and that's okay
Mhm.
too. But for me, like, the possibility of what could be, even if it's crazy, doesn't
Mhm.
threaten my faith. It just makes
Right.
me like, wow, there's a God out there, like, no matter what we could imagine, and it's biblical, no, what is it, no mind has imagined or conceived
Yeah.
of just what riches await us in heaven and what glory and
Yeah.
beautiful things eternity has in store for us. And I feel the same way about God. Like, no matter how much we can understand about who he is, there is so much more to him than our human mind can comprehend. And so imagining what might be unlocks praise in me, if that makes
I
sense.
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a perfect example of how that would totally not work for some people, right?
No, and that's okay because
Yeah.
yeah, and that's absolutely okay. And so yeah, and that's why I am sometimes hesitant to go too deep into my sci-fi. And if I ever do
Uh-huh.
write my sci-fi book, I will use a pseudonym because I don't
Yeah.
maybe I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm entertaining ways that yeah, I don't know. But anyway,
The good news is there's a lot more Christian speculative fiction
yeah,
than there used to be. There used to be like C.S. Lewis, and maybe that was it.
which I love.
Right, right. Who doesn't? Well, I know for me, one of the things, especially amongst Christian authors, that I feel a little bit weird about is I can get grittier. Like, I'm not a violent person in my real life, but I don't mind writing violence. I
Right.
would be bored writing a book that had like very little conflict, or like if the only conflict is, will he overrun her little family bakery or won't he? Like,
Right.
it's got to be bigger stakes. Like, so if I started that book, it would turn into, and then it turns out that the bakery is a front for this money laundering thing, and these mob guys go and like kill her whole family. Like, that's where my
Right.
brain goes. And
Mm-hmm.
in when I'm with the right kind of author who totally gets it, I have zero shame. But when I'm in a room of like, Christian authors and maybe like people who just write like sweet romances or, like happy happy genres, I do feel like, okay, I feel like they're thinking, why is she so like bloodthirsty, and do we need to be scared of this woman, like is she going to kill me when I'm sleeping or something? And so in my case, I haven't thought through this, so I know that's what makes me weird. I'm trying to think now how that can turn into a praying superpower. I think maybe one of the things is I can do research about real life events, and I don't shy away from it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's not that it doesn't impact me, and it's not that it is fun for me, but I know I can. Just kind of like I could never be the kind of social worker who goes in and has to decide what to do when a child is in danger. I could never handle that. I could do that job once and I would be broken for like the rest of my life. Like, as in, I could do that job for one day for one child and be
Mm-hmm.
broken forever. There are some people who, if they were to research Christian persecution or they were to research human trafficking in the US, it wouldn't work for them, right? But I can do that, and that does fuel my prayers. So,
Another way I see that playing out is you can steward hard stories. Like
oh, I love that
not
phrase.
everybody
Yeah.
can do that. And so you can take those in
Hmm.
and not only can you turn them into great fiction,
Hmm.
but you can, I mean, look at your prayer burden for North Korea,
Right.
which encompasses so many of the stories of the really hard things, of the
Hmm.
violent things, of the,
Yeah.
traumatic things. And you can steward
Hmm.
those and you can launch them into prayers.
Yeah. I love the way you put that. I love that phrase, a steward of, what'd you say, a steward of hard stories?
Hmm.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So again, I'm not going to sit and feel guilty that I don't adore sci-fi. Like, there actually are some sci-fi shows and stuff that I find interesting, but I'm not going to feel bad or guilty or like I'm less of a Christian because I don't like the same genre you do. I'm also not going to feel like horrifically ashamed and embarrassed that I do gravitate towards, like, I don't watch like real sappy Hallmark romances. I would much rather watch a thriller, right?
Hmm.
And so I don't feel like I need to, again, I can embrace who I am and take that into, okay, now this gives me a clue as to how the Lord has designed me. How can I turn that into my praying superpower? So
I
yeah,
love that.
Me too. I find that basically you could take anything that you do feel a little self-conscious of, or maybe you feel a little less than, right? I'm not like this mom I follow on Pinterest or on Instagram who's got, the super regimented schedule, and every day we have breakfast at 8, and then we have exercise time at 9, and then we have Bible study at 9:30, and then we have music at 10. Right? Like a lot of us might look at a woman like that and be like, I would love to have that kind of harmony in my home. But you know what? Maybe God has equipped 10% of moms to do that. And maybe you're in the 90% that he has given other gifts. And it's not, oh, well, you can't do this, honey, but that's okay because you're actually good at this. It's not that. It's you weren't meant to do this. You weren't meant to have this kind of schedule because you were meant to, I think you're a perfect example. You're really good about being able to be flexible with your schedule. So I can call you up at some random time and be like, hey, I got this idea. Do you want to jump on the phone and chat about it? And you're like, sure. Or I call you up when we both, still lived in Alaska. Hey, I'm in town tomorrow. Are you free? And you say, sure. And so it's not just that, oh, poor Jamie doesn't have the perfect schedule regiment that a real Christian woman would have. But that's okay because she has some of these other things. Like God's giving her a little pat on the head as the concession. It's the opposite. This is how God designed you. It wasn't that he ran out of, the sparkle juice that he wanted you to have. It's just like, okay, I guess I'll give her a little bit more of the glitter juice instead. It's
Hmm.
that he had the exact recipe when he made each one of us. And I think that it can be so freeing when we learn not just to compensate for what we conceive of as our weaknesses, but to truly embrace them and say, okay, what does this actually do to make me superwoman, right? In my prayers or just in my day-to-day life.
I love that. So we need to restate that again. So not just to say, how can I compensate for my perceived weaknesses, but like embrace them
Yeah.
and claim them as superpowers. So was it the Clifton Strengths or was it something else that I read that talks about living in your like basement of
Yeah,
a
that's
personality
Clifton.
trait or an
Mhm.
attic? Was that how it was?
Yeah,
Or
yep, exactly.
balcony? What was
Yep.
it?
Balcony. You're right, balcony, basements and balconies. So the idea is in the Clifton Strengths, there's 34 different attributes that everybody has in varying degrees. It's used more in the corporate world. And the idea is that everybody with with so many strengths, you're ranked 1 through 34. There's basically just like your DNA, there's no way that somebody's going to have the exact same makeup as you in the exact same order. And the idea isn't, oh, if you have this strength, you hit the genetic lottery or the personality lottery and you're better or life is going to be easier for you. It's that these are all strengths. And when you are working from a healthy point of strength, we call that your balcony. So, for example, like my futuristic is my number one, and that's the strength that allows me to like always be forward projecting, always seeing the future, always being really optimistic and, big dreams and stuff like that. When I'm in my balcony, that means it's really easy for me to have a very clear vision. Like we talked about North Korea. I have a very clear vision, to the pixel of what
Mhm.
North Korea will look like when it is a free country and the people there are free to worship the Lord and the Holy Spirit has like revived the land. To me, like I don't have to stretch to come up with that picture. And so that fuels my prayers. That's an example of living in like a balcony. When you live in the basement of a strength, it's where you're allowing your strength to operate at its source. Just kind of like the things that make you fall in love with your spouse might be the things that, you end up being really annoyed with later on, right? There's double sides to everything. So living in the basement of my futuristic would be like right at the start of COVID and right at the start of lockdown, where I was like, okay, I don't know how long lockdown's going to happen, so I cannot write. because I don't know if every single book that is published after 2020 is going to have to portray a world that is so vastly different than the
Mm.
world of February 2020, right? And I just couldn't. And so I was stuck. And when I talked to Becca, my strengths coach, she's been on the podcast not too long ago talking about aging and menopause, and I loved chatting with her about that. But when I was talking to her about it, the way she put it is like, yeah, your futuristic is glitching. I'm like, oh,
I love it.
that makes sense. Because I was walking in circular arguments for like 15 minutes. I was like, so I could keep writing this book and not mention the pandemic, but then if the pandemic gets too long, the book's gonna be dated. But then I can mention the pandemic, but then if the pandemic is short, it's gonna look dated. And I was just going and it's like I was glitching and we can live there. Or similarly, my imagination, again, it fuels my prayers because I can imagine these amazing things pretty easily. And that gives fuel to my prayers. But for other people, an imagination is like the very worst because it can drive you anxiety, right? If
Hmm.
if you're really good at saying what if, that can work for you. That could say, "Ooh, what if God opens the doors of North Korea? What if there's an amazing revival there? What if all of this?" But it could also turn into, "What if I die when I'm crossing the street tomorrow? What if, a natural disaster strikes my town?" So it's kind of that, yeah, every attribute. It's not that some people have good attributes or that we're made up of both good and bad attributes. It's that we all have this makeup of attributes and they can all be a strength or they can all be a liability.
Yeah, and it kind of goes along with the whole like theological argument. If God created everything, God
Mhm.
created Satan, who ultimately became evil. He created him as an angel of light. He created him as
Mhm.
an angel, but Satan twisted what he was meant to be. So basically, it's
Yeah.
the idea that anything that is bad or negative
Hmm.
is a twisted version of something that could be good.
I
And
think so.
that's I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole because I
Right.
think there's some things that absolutely you can't
This is
say,
good. Good
oh,
is
it was good.
good.
But
Evil is
maybe it
evil.
emerged from, I mean, in creation,
Yeah.
everything began as good. And then there was
Yeah.
a fall. And then there was, so I don't know. Maybe that was
Well,
a,
no, I get what you're saying. And I would also say, yeah, there are limits, right?
yeah,
Like
there are
I,
limits. We
I
don't want to,
wouldn't say, let's look for the good in Lucifer, right? Like some things just
right.
are evil. But
Yeah.
I really love, and maybe you can remind me of exactly how you put it. It was something you said a long time ago about something your friend said about how every spiritual gift has its kind of like twisted counterpart. Do you remember
Hmm.
that? Like your friend had come from an ancestry with like shaman type. Is this ringing any bell or am I am I inventing a conversation that we never had? I know we had it. Okay.
I
But you're
think
looking blank.
no, no, no. Well, I'm trying to think. I don't remember the shaman part,
Okay.
but I remember. So go ahead, give me a little bit more.
Okay, so the idea is that everything that God created to be good, the
Yeah,
devil has a counterpoint that he tries to make wicked or
right.
evil. So this specific friend was talking about the difference between spiritual discernment that comes from the Lord and
Mm-hmm.
somebody who would be more drawn toward like maybe occultic practices, right? But
Mm-hmm.
like I think a lot of like I think even Harry Potter, I've read like the first third of the first book. It's probably all. But isn't it somewhat about like if you dabble too much in these like good spells, then you get, it can open the door to the dark side. Or maybe I'm getting into Star Wars. I'm losing the thread. But this idea of
Mixing the fantasy genre.
right. And it's all speculative fiction. It's all the same.
It
No.
is the same.
But this idea that even the things that God gives us as gifts, the devil
Yes.
can twist, right?
Yes,
And
that is such a truth. That's kind of what I was trying to say, I think, in a
yeah,
roundabout way.
yeah. And then the opposite can also be true. The things that we think of as weaknesses or liabilities, God can turn into our superpowers.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
So
yeah.
like I think of my depression as one. Like I don't I've come to really embrace it. Like I would not be me if that weren't a part of my makeup.
Mm-hmm.
And the way it would be the liability is I don't know when I go to sleep if I'm going to wake up and have tons of energy to do a ton of things or if I'm going to have like zero energy to accomplish nothing. But so that's the liability side of it. The superpower side of it is that I have learned to listen to just kind of my body and my mood in a way that a lot of people never had to develop. And so I know to the second when it's time for me to jump into a project, right? Kind of like what we were talking about with our book and how we had a
Yeah.
season of it just lying in rest. And when the time came to pick that book back up, like I was 120% in, right? And
Hmm.
so it can be something that we think of as, well, that's just a liability, and oh, isn't that sweet that she's learned to put a positive spin on it. But I think about it one more step. I think about it as, because I have this super ability to be able to tap into what I have the energy to do and what I'm meant to do on any given moment, that means I'm a woman who lives with depression, right? So that's another thing. I think that a cool thought experiment for listeners could be like, what's one thing that you would change about yourself if you could? And then take that and be like, well, how could you spin it so that that one thing maybe is the superpower that can make you an amazing prayer warrior, and you've just never thought of it that way.
Yeah. Well, and I was just sharing with Pam Fields on the Mom Next Door podcast, my first interview about our book.
Hmm.
And I was just talking to her about my just kind of chronic struggles with fear and chronic worry
Hmm.
in general, my tendency to go to the worst case scenario. My forward thinking tends to go ugly
Yeah.
and dark.
Yeah.
And just in the past, just the idea, this whole anxiety thing, it can be a superpower in a couple of different ways. And I just feel like when I'm emotionally fragile, it unlocks worship in a way that I can't experience and don't experience when I'm feeling
Hmm.
solid and like I'm on top of the world.
Hmm.
And so I just think of some of my most intense and beautiful times of praise and worship have been when
Hmm.
I'm at the end of myself and I have nothing to give, and all I can do is just, you know, basically listen to worship music or
Hmm.
praise God through worship, or just let my tears be prayers. It has
Yeah.
freed me. It frees me to a different side of prayer that doesn't involve effort. It doesn't involve outward energy necessarily.
Hmm.
It's just a raw and like stripped away of everything else
Yeah.
communion with God. And it can be a superpower
Yeah.
when you recognize, and that applies also to hormonal fluctuations and the
Hmm.
4P, PMS, pregnancy, postpartum, and perimenopause.
Oh, I've never heard of those in there. Yeah, but they can
I just
have a season of.
like all of that, that spans, basically every woman's experience of one of those
Yeah.
at some point.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's just basically like all of those things can wreak havoc on your emotions. And
Add
that
puberty to it too.
puberty, that's the fifth P. Oh my goodness.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, basically any time of emotional fragility, I feel like can be a superpower because we're at the
Yeah.
end of ourselves and all we can do is meet with God in a way that sometimes you feel raggedy and just like why would he even want me to be here? I have nothing to give.
Hmm.
And then you
Hmm.
have the aha moment of he never asked that. He loves you right
Right.
where you are, not because
Yeah.
of anything you've done or can give him, but
Hmm.
because of who you are, because you're his daughter.
Yeah. Well, I love that you mentioned pregnancy because I think this is a perfect example to drive the point home. Just about any unpleasant symptom of pregnancy that women like hate and
Oh
complain about,
yeah.
and rightly so, there
Hmm.
actually is a very powerful reason for it, that it's beneficial to
Hmm.
the baby or the mom or both of them. So like at one point, I was having like really bad hip pain and hip discomfort, and it kind of felt like my pelvis like just was floating around. Like some
Right.
days it'd go this way, some days it'd go that way. And
Yep.
and my doctor explained this is your body getting ready for your pelvis to expand so that a baby can come out of your birth canal. That takes
Right.
a lot of effort. You don't, so in general, a non-pregnant woman wants a pelvis that can kind of stay in its place when it's meant to,
Right.
But when you're 3 weeks away from passing a baby out your birth canal, you want your pelvis to be a little bit more fluid
Little
and
flexible.
a little flexible. And that's exactly what we're talking about, these things that we might see as character flaws or inconveniences or personality, not even personality quirks, because sometimes those can have a positive connotation, but just personality defaults, right? Or personality flaws is probably a better one.
Hmm.
These can all point us to how has God designed you to make that a superpower.
Hmm.
So before we go too deep, we haven't even done our just for fun or opened up in prayer. So
Oh, that's right.
before we do that, let me ask you as a just for fun, what is something that you would change about yourself if you could? Or if you can't think of something right now, like looking back at your life, what is something that you would have wanted to change about yourself? And then can you maybe find a way to spin it so that is one of your superpowers?
I would say hands down, I would love to be more organized naturally. Like
Mhm.
I kind of want to be one of those women that, you know, stays on top of their kids' schedules, is on time,
Mhm.
is able to just like I don't know, have a fuller plate because I feel
Yeah, that's
like
a good way to put it.
people, it's kind of like your closet. Like if you have a huge closet organizer where you can put all kinds of stuff, you can store more stuff in your closet.
Right.
And I
Mhm.
feel like the times when I am able to be more organized and more regimented and more disciplined in my day to day, I can pack a lot of stuff in. But in general, I tend to be distractible and a little bit more fly by the seat of my pants. And so it tends to make my plate smaller. I can't fit as much in and be as productive or whatever. So I would definitely say I would like to have a more organized, regimented, like be more like type A, if you will. You know
Uh-huh.
what I mean?
Uh-huh.
But on the flip side, I've come to realize that I have one way that that has inadvertently been a superpower is I remember the first time that I approached this, I was planning our wedding and I prayed. I had a binder and I didn't know what to do with it. I was like, I know I need a binder. I
That's
know I need to do
adorable.
something, but I got a binder and I thought I need to plan this wedding. And I just remember sitting there at the computer, God, I know I'm not going to be able to organize this wedding. Help me to be an organized person. And
Mhm.
it was like a switch flipped and
Yeah.
I started organizing it. And I actually did a really good job of keeping stuff straight in a way
Uh-huh.
that I had never ever done before in my life.
That's cool.
So I do have to rely on God more for times when I need a lot of organization. I think of
Mhm.
our conferences and the
Yeah,
different moving parts of those conferences and
that's a
thinking,
lot.
there's no way. And
Mm.
God provided not only the organization, but the people and
Yeah.
the right place at the right time. But apart from that, I also think that even that's a little bit of compensation through prayer. But
Right.
another way, though, that I can really see, you mentioned me being flexible, and I am
Yeah.
a flexible person. Like,
Yeah.
I can kind of fly by the seat of my pants with stuff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think that I don't have as much a problem shifting gears with things when it comes to prayer, if we're talking about prayer
Yeah.
superpowers.
Mm.
And I think almost survival has made it so that I do a lot of praying on the spot where I know that
Yeah.
if I don't do it right then and there, I'm going to forget or
Yeah.
not schedule time for it. So praying on the spot right there, right then and there, practicing the presence of God is really my
Mm-hmm.
primary form of prayer, is just talking to God throughout my day,
Yeah.
kind of because it's difficult for me to like carve out that hour of prayer or that even
Mm-hmm.
15 minutes of prayer where I'm still and
Yeah.
yeah. So
That's very, very cool.
yeah. What about you?
Let's see, I'm trying to think of an example I haven't used. Oh, I know. I am a very unintimidating person, right? Like I have a really hard time standing up for myself in like a customer service setting or things like that. Like once I counted all of the strikes against me, so I'm a woman. I'm very short. I'm not even 5 foot. I am part Asian, which kind of has this connotation of being less brash, more demure. That's definitely how I was raised. I was raised both in from all sides of my family in this kind of tradition that women are quieter, girls are quieter. And so all of those and I'm someone who just like is scared of confrontation anyway. So all of those things make me very unintimidating, and it can be embarrassing and it can also be very frustrating. There are times where if it, especially with customer service type stuff, I know that if I were my husband, if we switched spots, he would get the resolution he needed in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And 5 hours later, I'm still not resolved. And some of that's on me, right? Some of that is because I do not keep pushing. I'm like, oh, they put me on hold and then the call got disconnected. I guess I'll just forget about it, right? So some of it is on me, but some of it is I know that when people look at me, they don't say, oh, here is somebody that we need to make sure to give what they are asking for, or we're gonna have trouble on our hands.
Mm-hmm.
So that is in certain ways it can be quite frustrating. It can definitely feel disempowering. I think that for a lot of women, if you are a woman like me who doesn't feel like you can get your voice heard, I think that can bleed into our prayer lives. If you're the kind of woman who's not really used to speaking something and having something change, that can teach you a kind of learned helplessness that can bleed over into your prayers. However, I recognize that God made me in this way. And so I recognize it's not my job to completely change my personality when I need something done. It's my job to lean into who God made me. And so maybe that is turning on the sweetness of, oh, I know you guys are so busy. It must be so rough, but yeah, I still need this thing that you told me you were going to get me 2 weeks ago. Like, but so that's kind of the compensation, but the superpower I think can come in. There are times when you need somebody who has zero intimidation factor,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if I needed to go and like sometimes Scott has come to me and he's like, can you tell so and so at church that like this thing is, because if he were to say it,
Right.
they would feel like they were in trouble. They would
Right.
feel like they had done something horrifically wrong. But I can go in and say it. And again, it comes across like, oh, like so I do sometimes hate that I'm not taken as seriously as sometimes I would like to be. But
Yeah.
I recognize that sometimes that is exactly who the church or the Lord needs at that time. I can go to someone and have it mean zero. Like, I'm trying to think of just an example. Like, let's say that we're at youth group and a girl doesn't realize that her underwear is showing through her leggings, right? Or something like that. I can be the kind of person who could point that out with minimal embarrassment. Where other people, it would turn into like this big thing that the poor girl would be thinking about years later, right? So in
Right.
certain cases, and then I also think about I think about my grandma, like smuggling Bibles into China and just being the kind of woman that's so overlooked and that nobody thinks of as a threat. And she's just walking through these lines like with contraband in her pockets and nobody
I
thinks
love
to
it. Oh my
question
gosh,
her.
that's so good.
Yeah.
That is so good. Oh, I love it.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
before we get too far in, do you want to, is this going to be our opening and our closing prayer, maybe?
it might be. Okay. Yeah, I guess. But yeah, I'll say a prayer. God, we just thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about prayer. Thank you for making us so unique, both in our womanhood and in our individuality. We pray right now for each person listening. Lord, I just ask that you would help each one of us to just take one thing that we don't like about ourselves and just bring it before you. And I pray that you would reveal a way that it's a superpower or that it could be used as a superpower. We thank you that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And we just pray that you would help us to embrace who you've made us to be and run with it. And that it would make us more powerful in our prayer lives and just more effective for your kingdom overall in our everyday lives. Amen.
So I was even thinking about people in the Bible, and I was trying to picture there are certain, sometimes we only get a sentence or two about a Bible character and it doesn't tell us a ton about their personality. And so we have to just kind of imagine and wonder. And, that's where biblical fiction can be pretty cool. I've got a little bit of mixed feelings. Like, I love that biblical fiction exists, but I also recognize that in certain cases, maybe it does take more liberties than some Christians appreciate and stuff like that. But there are other characters that we see enough of that we really do get their personality out there. So, like, I'm thinking of Peter, and I'm thinking of how he's always like putting his foot in his mouth, and he's always thinking before he says something. And, he probably had a pretty big temper and was, maybe a little hot-headed. And I'm picturing us having this conversation with Peter being like, yeah, I wish I weren't so brazen, and I wish I weren't so doofusy. That's not the right word, but maybe you can help me fill in one. But do you know what I mean? Like, he'll just say something and like, Peter, where'd that come from?
Yeah, unfiltered for
Unfiltered,
sure.
right? So in certain cases, I could see someone like Peter feeling like all of those were personality flaws, right? Why can't I be more like John or something like that? But in this vein of making our liabilities instead our superpowers, what would you say makes Peter, like, why did God give Peter those specific attributes for positive reasons and not just his weaknesses that he was meant to learn to overcome?
I think Peter, so this is kind of an interesting aside about Peter. Have you ever heard someone say, like, oh, he got started strong, but then he petered out? Have you ever heard of that?
I have. Uh-huh.
So I'm assuming, and I recently, a few years ago, kind of figured out, I think the reason that that is said is because when Peter came out to walk with Jesus on the water, he started to sink after a little bit.
Oh, you know what's funny? I had a totally other Peter analogy. I
Okay,
was
tell me.
thinking I was thinking of Peter saying, "I will die for you," and then like
Mm.
running away with everybody else. So you're right. I mean,
So
this
he
is
did both. He
he
basically did.
yeah,
So with,
he made big grandiose
mhm.
claims that he didn't always follow through on immediately.
Right. But I think number one, God might have created Peter that way with that passion and that just like, yes, like
Uh-huh.
excitement and boldness and brashness, because he knew it was needed for the kingdom, because he knew that his kingdom had to have someone as the rock,
Yeah.
of the kingdom with big ideas,
Yeah.
with a lot of passion and emotion to get his
Yeah.
point across,
Without a
um,
filter.
without a filter. But I also think that the early perceived failures, the petering out in the water as he walked out to meet Jesus and kind of started to sink, or his, saying, yes, I will die for you. And yet he denies Jesus 3 times
Yeah.
before the rooster crows.
Hmm.
Um, I think that was a foundation of, like, Peter needed to experience those failures to remember where his strength came from. I mean, he was
Right.
called Peter, which he was renamed Peter, the rock,
Hmm.
but he had to realize that he wasn't the source of that strength, that God was his rock, and he needed that dose of humility, I think, to be mature, to grow in maturity. And I think we
Hmm.
need to give ourselves a lot of grace when it comes to, I find myself, after having been a Christian for a really long time, like I don't even remember as a child, like the moment I just committed to my life to Christ many different times as a young kid.
Hmm.
And so I expect, sometimes I'm like, oh, shouldn't I be further along? And
Hmm.
I'll make mistakes, but I don't know. I just think that those experiences of failure like that are to remind us, to get us grounded in whose we are and where our strength comes from. So yeah, I kind of feel like those same things that made him seem like he was kind of a joke at times because he was just
Uh-huh.
so "Brr." And
Uh-huh.
even like the cutting off of the ear
Right, the ear.
of
Impulsive.
the
He was
guard,
very impulsive.
he was impulsive. But all of those things, I think, when refined through discipline and trial and error, when harnessed and kind of gotten to the point of, reminding him through the failures that he's not perfect, he's not the source of
Hmm.
that strength, but maybe even I'm sure he had more failures later, though. I don't think he just became a mature believer after a few mistakes and then just became a different guy. Like, I'm sure he
Right.
made impulsive mistakes along the way later. But again, God needed that. He needed that to push his kingdom forward, whereas
Yeah.
a quieter, gentler disciple was not the one that was called the rock of the
Right.
church and was not elevated to that place in the early church.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, and I think we could even see that impulsivity as a superpower when he gets out of the boat, right? Like some
Right.
of us are harsh on Peter for sinking, and we
Right.
forget Peter was the only one who got out of the boat. And Peter
Yes.
did walk on water. There are two humans in history who have walked on water that we know of.
He's
And
one
Peter
of
was one
them.
of two. And so instead of focusing on, oh, and then he sank, that silly Peter, it's like
Mm-hmm.
he got out of the boat in a
Yeah.
storm. Like this is
Yes.
crazy stuff. And if he had not been the impulsive Peter and to have that impulsivity that sometimes did get him in trouble or sometimes could be seen as a flaw, he would have not have been the one to get out of the boat.
Yeah.
So
That's a really
yeah,
good point.
yeah. It's just seeing, yeah, God designed each of us in unique ways. I think it's another good reminder, like that we can, the more you learn about how your weaknesses can be your strengths, I think the more grace we show to other people. So instead of it being, I wake up at 7 every day to pray, why can't she? It turns into, okay, I was designed in this way and I'm doing that. And someone else was designed in a totally different way. Or sometimes it can be even more humbling than that. Maybe it's, yeah, I wake up at 7 every morning and pray for half an hour and she can't even like get out of bed. But do you know what? Maybe that person is functioning at 100% of their capacity. Well,
Mhm.
I'm coasting at 10% of my capacity,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like the widow's mite, but in terms of just what we have energy for. And
Hmm.
so if I'm the billionaire who's tithing $100,000 and feeling good about myself, I need to look at the widow who's got a penny that she gives to the Lord and realize she is giving God a much bigger gift than I have. So I think it helps us to
Yeah.
be gracious with each other and with ourselves as well.
Hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, do you want to wrap up here, or is there more you want to chat about in this one before we say goodbye?
No, I kind of feel like this summed up a lot of that, a lot of the message of kind of the overview, which is
Yeah.
what we're kind of after.
Yeah, just
Mhm.
as for maybe one more example, if any of the listeners are still having trouble picturing weakness and liability, can you think of something in any of your children that is kind of similar to what we're talking about? That maybe something like some parents would actually get on their kids like, why do you got to do this? But it actually is a strength.
Yeah, so with our daughter, I remember when she was little, and she's always been just a free spirit. She's always had a bold personality.
Mhm.
I've always had more of a timid, quiet
Yeah.
personality, and so we're
Uh-huh.
very different. And I just remember I was in this little stretch when she was like, I don't know, maybe a little older than a toddler, 3, 4, 5, I don't know.
Hmm.
But I just remember I would just be like, oh, be more ladylike, be
Oh,
more
uh-huh.
ladylike. And I remember praying one time, and I think my prayer was, to God, just help her to be more, I forget what the word was that I used,
Yeah.
but I think it was more,
Quiet.
be more ladylike. But
Uh-huh.
I just remember I heard like pretty clearly in my spirit God saying, but a warrior isn't ladylike.
Yeah.
And so I just feel like that was kind of the moment that I thought, you know what? Yes, there are areas where I want her to know the proper way to act and behave, but I definitely don't want to like put a damper
Yeah.
on her personality as God has
Yeah.
made her to try to hammer her into the wrong shaped
Mhm.
hole,
Yeah.
because I think of a friend who was probably the most influential Christian in my life in college, and pretty much like God used her to bring me back to himself after a time of
Mhm.
kind of wandering.
Mhm.
And it was because she kind of just grabbed me and was like, okay, you're my
Yeah.
friend now, and we're gonna pray about this. And like she was so instrumental in
Yeah.
rededicating my life to Christ. But she was not quiet.
Not
She was
ladylike in
bold.
your,
She was
yeah.
not ladylike. And the most terrible thing happened when she graduated from college because she got involved in a ministry that ended up dismissing her because she was not what, and I
Mhm.
don't, the words that they used were basically like she was not gentle and quiet enough.
Yeah.
And that made me very angry because it
Mhm.
actually, like, her faith took a hit. She fell away from her
Yeah.
faith for a while, and she was just one of the most passionate women for the Lord that I had met to that point. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's that idea of, yeah, I know God's going to use my daughter in big ways, and it's
Mhm.
not because she's going to be quiet.
Yeah, yeah. And you have the flip side too, because there are times where I look at myself and like, why can't I be more bold? Right. So
Me
I've got
too.
almost the opposite complex. But instead of being like, oh, I need to be more of a warrior, I can say, no, this is the way that God designed me and my personality.
You know
And so
what's
how can I use that?
You know what's kind of funny though?
Yeah.
We've had a couple of business meetings lately with other people, and I've seen business Alana, and
Oh,
business
you
Alana
have, yeah.
is very confident and
Yes.
very, like, you have some real strength and confidence and boldness
Uh-huh.
that you reserve for certain things, and I think
Yeah,
that's really
I can
cool to
pull it
see.
out.
I love it.
I
No, that's
kind of
very
forgot that
cool.
you don't see that side of me like when we just do what we're doing.
Right. No, I don't, because we have,
That's funny.
our business meetings are more like friend meetings where we talk.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
it was very,
Yeah.
yeah. So there's a business Alana in there that's very
Yeah.
bold and very confident.
But it's the boldness and confidence that aligns with who I am. Because I think if
Mhm.
I went into a business meeting and I tried to be the Fortune 500 like CEO, it would not work. Do you know what I mean? So instead of putting on another persona, it's more like how can I take who I am right now and turn that into how can I amplify who I already am
Right.
and not how can I completely change my entire personality to be who I think I need to be for this setting.
Right, exactly. And I think God
Mhm.
will do that, I think he will strengthen the areas, and maybe not even like maybe without us even realizing it, where we
Mhm.
need to be maybe stronger in certain areas
Yeah,
without you consciously saying, "Oh, I need to emulate this CEO of this company in
right.
this meeting so that I can," because
Hmm.
that's not what you do. You're very
Right.
naturally yourself, but you have
Hmm.
qualities that just naturally kind
Yeah.
of, yeah, strengthen what you already have.
Right, right. So yeah, I hope that this is encouragement to everybody listening to really lean into the personality style that God gave you, to not try to change it, to not see it as a flaw, but to basically say, okay, God, this is who I am. How can you amplify this
Mhm.
into the superwoman that you have created me to be? So our hope for you all is that you keep on finding a deeper and deeper just knowledge of who you are and how God made you so that you can lean into that more and more. And we'll talk to y'all next time.